Good morning. Good morning, Kate. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming out. It's the first day of spring. We're so glad. A little nippy, but it's the first day of spring. We'll take it. My name is Kate O'Connor, and I'm the Executive Director of the Brattleboro Area Chamber of Commerce. And on behalf of the board of the Chamber, most of whom are sitting right over here in the corner, I want to welcome you all here this morning. The legislative breakfast has become an annual event for us, and we very much appreciate all of our legislators for taking the time to come here this morning and every year. We have a couple people who are still going to be coming. Becca Balint is dropping her kids off at school. And she only gets to do it once a week, so she gets a special allowance today. What we're going to do is have all of the legislators introduce themselves and talk a little bit about what they're doing. And then we're going to open the floor up for questions. So please think of anything you've ever wanted to know. They're here to hopefully give you some kind of answer, if they can. And I'll just go through and introduce them right now, and then we'll have them go separately. We've got Tristan Toleno, Valerie Stuart, Laura Sibilia, Emily Long, Mollie Burke, Mike Mrowicki, and Jeanette White. And again, we are expecting Becca. And Mike Hebert and Carolyn Partridge both said they would be here today, so we may see them sneaking in. And before I put this show on the road, I want to just mention one other event that we are doing. You'll have this little green piece of paper. We're going to try our first ever, we're calling it a reverse mixer. We're going to have a mixer in the morning up at the Crosby House on April 26th from 7:30 to 9. You can come and you don't have to listen to anybody speak. You get free food and you can mingle around the Crosby House, so that should be really fun. But without any further ado, again, I want to thank the legislators for being here today, and I'm going to pass the microphone on to Tristan.
Good morning, thank you all. So thank you to the Chamber Board for being willing to be brave enough to be near us. You guys are all hiding. Somebody should come forward and sit here where we can see you. And we don't need a big buffer, just a little, there's a few feet here. So actually I was going to say thank you to everyone for coming out. Thank you to the board and to the Chamber for organizing this. And also I promised Kate that I would model good behavior. And you notice she started with the House, not with the Senate. So I'm going to try to be short. Jeanette's quiet back there. She's stewing silently, waiting for me. It was never Jeanette. That was the one that spoke so long. Some of you remember, don't you? So I will say this. I think that the question and answer period is probably the most important part of the conversation because of the fact that we want to hear what's on your mind and we want you to know a little bit about what we're doing, but it's impossible for us in 2 minutes to give you a full and accurate picture of everything that's happening in the State House. I'm on the Government Operations Committee this year for the first time, but I'm also the Assistant Majority Leader, and most of my attention is being part of the leadership team. Emily Long is the Deputy Assistant Majority Leader, and part of our job is to track everything that's moving in the House and try to have a big picture view. So I may field questions that nobody else wants to field if I know something about it, and if anyone wants to ask me why we did the recount, I'm happy to talk about it, but probably not, if you haven't heard that, see, nobody reacted, so you may not have tuned into that issue. But anyway, I'm happy to talk about anything in the Government Operations Committee, specifically around election law or some of the other structural questions around state government. But big picture, if there's a question that people have that's sort of a big picture question, I'm also happy to jump into that. And here's Valerie.
And actually, it's going to be Mike. I love to pass the mic to Mike.
You're going alphabetically, sorry.
No, Mike has to leave. But I just want to say Tristan downplayed his role as House Whip. He seems like a soft-spoken, nice guy, but...
Good morning, and thanks to Kate and everybody at the Chamber for once again putting on a wonderful breakfast and getting a good turnout here. My name's Mike Mrowicki. I represent the Wyndham 4 district. That's Putney, Dummerston, and Westminster. When I'm up in Montpelier, I call it the heart of the Southeast Kingdom. And it's one way we get the attention for what's often a forgotten part of Vermont. And now that we don't have a governor from down here, it can be even more so. I work on the House Human Services Committee, and I also work in Human Services, and that's why I have to leave in a few minutes. So I appreciate the others letting me talk next. Human Services deals with everything from child care to elder care and the spectrum of services in between. We're here at the retreat, and Peter Albert here is somebody we work with regularly and has helped raise the specter of the importance of mental health services, both for the obvious reason that people need those services, but the other piece is this is an economic driver. The retreat's now one of the largest employers in the area, and it's important that we recognize that contribution they make here. The big news, really, everything is coming down to the budget. And the challenge, I wish I had good news to tell you right now, but the challenge is there isn't a day that we hear chaos coming from Washington. The reality is the only thing that this president has made great again is Saturday Night Live. And I don't think that's helpful for the business community. We're trying to keep Vermont an island of sanity, but right now we're running up against the wall in the budget. The governor's budget started with the premise that he was asking every town in Vermont to tear up the school budgets they'd been working on for months and level fund them. Not only that, he asked the teachers' union to tear up their contract and unilaterally impose a greater contribution for their health services. That's not the way things work. We don't work by executive orders here in Vermont, and it didn't work. Now, the governor asked these towns to turn down their budgets, and 2 weeks ago at town meeting, 90% of them passed their budgets. So, given that they didn't agree with the governor, the legislature, who's been working, the House gets the budget first, asked the governor, could you come to the table? We need to work on this together. The governor refused. Not only did he refuse, he has issued a gag order to his staff not to talk to the legislature. That's not the way we get things done. So I have to say, I wish I had good news for you on the budget, but right now, the fact that we're kind of going it alone is not the way we've done things. And I have to say, we miss Peter Shumlin for a number of reasons. He was a great advocate for this part of the region. He was a great advocate for the retreat. But even when we disagreed at the start of the budget, you could talk with Peter and his administration. We negotiated. We got to a better place because that's what Vermont needed. I'm not sure what the strategy is of the current administration, but the fact that they've shut down communications is not a good sign. So we're going to try and do what we can. And I mention that because there's not a part of anything the government does or what affects you in business, what affects the retreat here, that isn't touched by the budget. We're concerned about what happens with the Washington budget because the current proposal out there for health care is going to hurt the retreat, it's going to hurt the local hospitals, it's going to hurt many people in this room. The idea that we're going to get less and spend a lot less when we've done a good job in Vermont in terms of covering people, and we know that when you cover people early, their expenses down the road in medical care are less. In any event, hopefully by the end of the session we'll have better news to report to you, but I'm going to pass the microphone now, and thank you all for coming here.
Thanks. Well, I agree with Mike in terms of, I think at the end of the day, a lot of us are going to miss Peter Shumlin, but I want to tell you that the South will ride again. I'm a horseback rider. I know that. I feel that. And I am on the Commerce and Economic Development Committee. And I don't want to get too deep in the weeds on politics, and so I have 3 minutes. But the long and the short of it is I served on the House Education Committee for 4 years. Education has been and always will be one of my top priorities. Educating our kids for the jobs of today and tomorrow is the most important thing we can possibly do as a state. So we on the Commerce Committee, one of my babies, now that I was on Ed for 4 years, now I'm on Commerce, it's my second term, I'm one of the last 4 standing. 2 of whom are women and 2 of whom are men, the chair and the vice chair, who I love dearly. We are doing some really great work. Here's the thing, we are working on independent contractors and we are working on workers' compensation. We are trying to do something that we tried to do last year, unfortunately. After many hours of testimony, a very comprehensive bill didn't work out. Why? Got sent back to the committee on a technicality. Ask Tristan, he can tell you the story far better than I. He'll whip it right into shape, my story. Anyway, the long and the short of it is, this year, we hope that the people who work outside the room can come in the room and can pull it together to agree. I'm talking about industry, and I'm talking about labor. I'm talking about insurance, and anyway. So we are hoping to put together a comprehensive bill which is patterned on the federal regulations that govern workers' comp and independent contractors. Why? Because this is vital to our small state. We are hiring people out of state to do the work in state that many people are highly qualified to do. Okay, enough about that. We can talk more about that later, and I'll defer to my agent, Tristan. Anyway, the other piece is career and technical centers. I really think these are the places where we can do a better job with 2-year degrees, 4-year degrees, workforce development. Not every kid needs a 4-year degree. Not every kid needs a 2-year degree. Some kids need a 1-year apprenticeship or a 2-year apprenticeship so they can become electricians, and they can, anyway. What I call it is co-tour, co-tour education, an education that fits. Not one shoe fits every foot. I have pretty big feet for a pretty small person. So I think that we need the right shoe for the right people. And then we're also doing a bunch of stuff. Oh, and on that, happily, this Friday from 2:30 to 4:30, Adam Grinwald, BDCC, they're a rock star. They're doing a great job. We got their second lieutenant, or maybe first lieutenant now, here, Laura Sibilia, Adam Grinwald. They're doing a fabulous job, and I'm going to be on their task force and recruitment team. We're doing a kind of a short but deep dive into how we can get New Chapter the employees they need right now. And a bunch of those employees are in this state, but we got to train them. Anyway, enough about that. I'll talk more later. Bye. Thanks.
I'm going to try and follow directions. Laura Sibilia, I'm an independent. I represent Wardsboro, Dover, Somerset, Searsburg, Stamford, Reedsboro, and a little bit of Whitingham. This year I am serving on a new committee in the House. It's the Energy and Technology Committee. We went from 3 natural resources committees in the House down to 2, and took telecommunications out of the Commerce Committee. Put that up with energy, and also stuck IT into this committee. It's actually a fairly big charge. We're out kind of getting the groundwork and a basis, I think, for work going forward the second half of the session and biennium. So, interesting committee. This year, we have the 10-year telecommunications plan, which is going to be getting a major rewrite. We've been focusing on understanding that, as well as reauthorizing Act 248A. That's a means of erecting and installing telecommunications infrastructure and bypassing the Act 250 process. It's a little easier. That process sunsets every 3 years, so we've just reauthorized it for another 3 years this year. I'm also very interested in the energy planning requirements that we have throughout the state, the 90 by 250 for renewables, and the potential in Vermont and in our region, actually, we have some technical expertise around energy storage. I think that is in a very large grid scale coming, and we're looking to get more comprehensive understanding of what what that will mean for Vermont. I always have been and remain extremely interested in the education discussions in the state. I'm a 15-year school board member, serving on an Act 46 study committee, represent 2 towns who voted down their budget this year. These are very interesting, difficult, challenging times right now with regard to education. So I think that's it. So there you go.
Hi, thank you for having all of us here today. I'm Emily Long. I represent the towns of Wyndham 5. I represent the towns of Marlborough, Newfane, and Townsend. I also serve on the Education Committee where I've been for this is my 3rd year there. And I'll just do a quick run through of the things that we've been talking about. I want to follow up on Valerie's comments around career and technical education and her passion around it. We also believe very deeply that we need to be finding a way to link our students' interests and their access to career and technical education and try to link that to our businesses and our workforce development. It is a complicated partnership between our public schools and our public career and tech schools, and it's not the easiest time for us to be making major changes in there, but what we have done is we just passed a bill out of our committee to expand, to develop a pilot program for 7th graders in our public schools to be able to apply for a grant for their 7th grade middle school kids to be able to explore career and technical interests. So we're thinking that might really be a good start for us, getting kids interested in career and technical education at a younger age. It is still offered in the career and tech centers in grades 11 and 12, so we think reaching them earlier, and we've taken a lot of testimony in this, and there's a lot of support for that piece. So we're gonna see how we can do well with that and put some money into that. We'll see what we're gonna do. There's not a lot of money there in the state. We passed a yield bill out last Friday. The yield bill is our tax bill in the state, and it included a proposal for changing our ed funding system. Be right up front, I voted against the yield bill because of this proposal. I felt that, especially for Wyndham County, it wasn't addressing the needs in our small and rural schools. And I felt like it was more of I do believe it's more of a penalty for high spending schools, which Wyndham County is the highest spending county in education spending in the state of Vermont. So this basically just changes the tax rates for those school districts that are on the high spending end. You're suddenly going to get taxed higher if you're above the average, which is 15.6, I think, in the state of Vermont, 15,600 or so in the state of Vermont. So everybody who spends more than that will have a higher tax rate over a phased-in period. And then folks lower than that will have tax relief. Anyone who spends less than that. There are a few districts in Wyndham County that spend less than that. My other concern about it is that it is being looked at as cost containment, but I have great concerns about whether it really is cost containment, because if school districts who spend less now are able to spend more, which is actually the idea, and then the higher spending districts spend less, we're still going to be spending the same amount of money. So is this really cost containment? I don't necessarily believe it will be. I do think it is a more equitable funding formula for school districts, but if we're looking for cost containment, that's not what I'm seeing out of this bill. So we'll see where it goes. One thing it does do is it takes away the excess spending threshold, and that was appealing to me in some ways for some school districts, but it reinstates it back in 2022. So still looking at penalties, and what I would like to see is a more comprehensive review of our ed funding system and actually look at why high spending school districts are spending a lot of money and what are they getting for it. So that's what my hope is for our future. We'll see whether this bill passes. Expanded learning opportunities are another thing that are on our radar, as well as pre-K, the Act 166.
Both of those are, the biggest concerns we have around both of those are related to students who need the services the most. Are they able to access the programs? And so we're still reviewing that. I'm hoping we can find an answer to that. And the last one is Act 46, and I see Becca just walked in the room. Thank you for being here, Becca, because she's the one who'll be able to speak more to Act 46 right now, being on the Senate Ed, who has taken on Act 46. It's just coming into our committee. If it passes I don't think it's passed the floor of the Senate yet, am I right? But if it passes there, it'll come into our committee, and we'll be addressing the challenges and issues around Act 46. So I'll let Becca speak to that. So thank you.
Good morning, I'm Mollie Burke. I represent part of Brattleboro. I'm on the Transportation Committee, and this is my 9th year on the Transportation Committee. And I just want to thank Kate for being such a wonderful organizer of this chamber, and this is a really great group of people, and it's wonderful to be here this morning. So we just passed out, the House just passed the transportation bill. It's a comprehensive bill that we pass every year that includes funding for all the roads, bridges, towns, etc., every transportation part of the state budget. And it was it's usually pretty non-controversial. About a little more than half of the funding comes from the federal government. We get funding from the gas tax. That's another issue. The gas tax is pretty flat, and that's a problem long-term for transportation funding. But meanwhile, the budget is pretty much a little bit more than last year, pretty much level funded. And I want to say that I just want to give a shout out to the Agency of Transportation. They're really amazing group of people to work with, very customer oriented. If I bring any issue to them, they are very, very responsive. And I think that over the past 10 years or whatever, the state has done a really great job of keeping up with our infrastructure and trying to be really proactive about that. And the I-91 bridge will be done, it's supposed to be done soon. And I've had the opportunity to go up there once in the fall and then recently a couple weeks ago. So basically that's that. The transportation bill will now go to the Senate, and then we'll see what they do with it. Big issue in transportation and in other issues is the other committees is the stormwater issue. And that is going to be a hard thing for towns. Towns are going to have to come up with a plan to address stormwater. It's going to be costly. We are trying to direct money that way. Overall in the state, it's going to be about $62 million a year for 20 years to do this cleanup of the state's waters. A lot of unknowns because this was a mandate from the EPA, federal EPA, about cleaning up our waters. Anyway, that's just a little thing to put on the radar. Starting in 2017, towns are going to have to come up with a plan for things that address, and actually in the long run, doing things like this will also help protect us against future flooding. And highway safety, we just passed a highway safety bill. We will be working on a miscellaneous motor vehicle bill, etc. A couple things that I've been doing, I've been working closely with Paul Costello of the Vermont Council on Rural Development. And some of you may know that he has sort of spearheaded this program called the Vermont Climate Change Economy Initiative, which is thinking about our economy, that we can address our environmental issues related to climate and air pollution by also growing our economy. And I have a few bills that I've been working on regarding that, but one of them I'm testifying on tomorrow in House Commerce has to do with putting in some money to the Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund in order to sort of help with entrepreneurs and people who want to start businesses that might have to do with addressing environmental issues and also job creation. So also, I just testified on a bill. We are getting about $18.5 million from the Volkswagen, or hopefully this will be coming through Vermont. I mean, it just hasn't been finalized yet, from the Volkswagen mitigation settlement. And that money is, the Department of Environmental Conservation is coming up with a plan to how to spend that money, and there is a great potential for electrifying our transportation system, for investing in cleaner fueled vehicles and buses, school buses, heavy and light duty trucks, things like that. So that's a pretty exciting development, and there's going to be some public input, some meetings on that with seeking public input. So I think I'll stop there, and happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Good morning, I'm Becca Balint, and I apologize for being late. My wife is on the chamber board, so we were tag teaming this morning about who was doing kid drop-off, so it was my turn this morning. So the two things I most want to tell you about are moving through the Economic Development Committee, and we'll be making a stop in finance and in appropriations, and that's the omnibus housing bill, and a bill that we are hoping we can convince other senators is a good idea, which is the increase, the expansion of the tax incremental financing program, TIFs. It hasn't been popular in the past, but we don't have a lot of levers for creating projects in smaller downtown locations. We simply just don't have the capacity at the state level to create these projects. So I will get to TIFs in just a moment. First, I want to tell you about the omnibus housing bill. I have been here for, this will be my third year now, talking about the importance of housing and how it relates to economic development statewide. So we have a critical shortage of housing, not just at the lower income strata, which we do, and we still do, and it's persistent, but we also have shortage of housing for all income levels across the state. And depending on where you live, you may feel it more acutely than others. So the one spot that doesn't have this same issue is Rutland. Rutland actually right now has a surplus of housing because they've had a decrease in population. What they don't have is housing that anyone would like to live in because it needs to be updated. It needs to be refurbished. So there are differences. So whenever I talk at one of these gatherings, it's hard because we have to shorthand. So I understand that there are geographical differences, but if you look statewide, we do have an acute housing shortage. And the Futures Project, which was funded by the Vermont Chamber, though the research that they did was separate from the Vermont Chamber, identified a growth target of 5,000 new and improved housing units annually, just to keep pace with what we need for workers. And I know that many of you in the room understand we have many jobs statewide. We're having a hard time finding workers for those jobs, and one of the components is lack of housing. Okay, so that's one piece. Now the roadmap to end homelessness came to a similar conclusion at the lower economic strata. They're talking about 1,200 new homes that are affordable or at 30% of median income or below over each of the next 5 years. Okay, so we've got various lenses coming to the same conclusion. And in the past, it's been a heavy lift because we haven't had a feeling in the House and in the Senate and in the governor's office that this needed to be a priority. And right now, we seem to have this synergy saying now is the time. We're having all of these voices saying the same thing. We need to put a concerted effort and money into expanding housing. So it will be coming to the floor hopefully next week. There will certainly be some changes, though we're feeling very excited about the opportunity to have a housing bond that's going to be overseen through Vermont Housing and Conservation Board with help for the Vermont Housing Finance Agency. And we hope to put quite a few new units of housing on the market in the next few years. So, as I mentioned earlier, tax increment financing has not been very popular in the past in the legislature for a variety of reasons. I won't get into the details, but there have been some areas that have benefited greatly from this. One of them being Burlington, and they've had quite a few TIF projects that they have been able to use to enhance their downtown and their waterfront. And what we're asking is to expand this program for smaller municipalities like Brattleboro, because we have a vibrant downtown that we want to continue to grow, so it's a place where people want to settle and raise their children. Because as you know, we also have a shortage of students in our public school system. So it's all related. I do sit on Senate Education in addition to Economic Development. We will have a Act 46 flexibility pathway bill coming over to the House soon. It is not major changes to Act 46. We are still very much committed to merging districts, okay? Not necessarily merging schools, merging districts. because as Emily and I speak about constantly, we do feel like nationally the public school system is under threat from a variety of sources, and we want to do everything we can to shore up our public schools and to continue the work that we've done to make them schools of excellence. So I'm going to stop there because I want to make sure we have time for questions. I'm going to pass it off to my colleague, Senator White.
Thank you. I will say, often we say it's an honor to serve, and some of you have heard me say this before, but the longer I serve, the more of an honor it becomes, because when I was first in the Senate, I didn't have to make a whole lot of decisions or take a whole lot of stands, and so I didn't have the opportunity to make very many of you mad. But now that I've been there for 14 years, I'm sure I've made every single one of you mad about something I've done or haven't done. So it is a real honor to continue to serve you. So in the Senate, we're on two committees. We're on Judiciary and Government Operation, or we're on two committees. I am in the Judiciary Committee in the morning, and I chair Government Operations in the afternoon. I'm just going to go through a couple things that we've been working on. In the Judiciary Committee early on, we did a bill that was in response to the executive order that came out of Washington. Of course, it was hard to focus on it because the executive order changed almost every week, if not every day. So it was an executive order that said that state and local law enforcement were going to be responsible for enforcing immigration laws, and that we were going to, it was kind of hidden, but we were going to create a Muslim registry. It didn't exactly say that, but that's what had been said before, so that was how it was interpreted. So we did a bill that said that state and local law enforcement officers are not immigration enforcers. That's a federal issue, and we will not participate, and we will not collect any data that will lead to any kind of a registry at all based on personal characteristics. We passed that very early on. Thanks, and just for your information, there was a lot of support for it. It passed the Senate by 30 votes, so there was no opposition. It passed the House with just a few dissenting, and the initiative for it came from the governor and the Attorney General's office. So this is something that everybody in the state really supports. We are also looking at reducing our prison population by offering more appropriate treatment for people who might need mental health treatment or substance abuse treatment rather than having them languish in prison. We're also looking at a lot of, well, they're not smaller issues, but they tend to be bills that don't get a lot of publicity, like fentanyl, which is a terrible scourge on us right now. And so we've just passed a bill that enhances a penalty for fentanyl distribution. Mental health for prisoners, trying to figure out how we can provide appropriate mental health for people in prison. And for those of you who are mental health workers, if there are any here, we did pass a bill that would reverse the Supreme Court decision called the Kulagowski decision. So I'm not going to go into that. Those of you who know what it was know what a terrible decision it was by the Supreme Court, I believe, and we have rectified that. We're all in government operations. One of the things we did early on was pass an ethics commission that would set up a focal point for you to call if you have a complaint against an elected, appointed official or a state employee. So it's a focal point for you to lodge that complaint, and then it'll be funneled. It's a kind of a complicated system. There were many people who felt that we should, including our Secretary of State, who felt that we should have a fully funded ethics commission with subpoena power, investigative power. We didn't think that we needed to go that far because we don't know what the problem is yet. We don't know what the magnitude of the problem is. So what we did is pass this smaller one. If we need to increase it, we can. But what was told to us by many people, and instinctively we all know this, that if you set up something in the government, it's really hard to reduce it later on. So They'd be looking for things to justify their existence, so let's start small and build if we need to. We also had, little did I know, I was very surprised, and our whole committee seemed to be surprised, to find out that we don't have anything called a media shield law. What that means is that if I'm a reporter and I'm talking to Becca about something and it's confidential, she's being a whistleblower and she's telling me something, I can't protect her as my source. In Vermont, we cannot do it. We have no protection for confidential sources around the media. So we just passed a bill that would give that protection. Well, we passed it out of our committee. It's going to the Senate floor on Tuesday or Wednesday, I believe. So we hope others will support us. Becca, thank you. Just let me say two things that we're looking at in government operations. It's going to take longer. It's not out there right now, but we're looking at law enforcement in the state. We do not have a law enforcement system. We have state police, then we have 100 certified officers who work for the state for things like DLC and DMV and those, fish and wildlife, game wardens. And then we have 80 law enforcement entities, completely separate entities in the state. It's a lot of law enforcement entities that in the state the size of Vermont that aren't coordinated. They don't have to talk to each other or anything. So we're looking at the whole system and what we should do. We've spent a lot of time talking to law enforcement, and we're going to hopefully have some more public hearings on that. And that's enough. I'm glad to take any questions, so thank you.
Does anyone want to be the first to ask the question? Okay, oh, Michael.
This Sunday, Laura brought up about energy storage, which the price of energy storage is coming way, way down, so it's potentially a real game changer. And so wondering what the role of government, have you talked yet about what the role of the state government might be to help incentivize it? So a lot of it's market driven, but you know, what role might the state have?
So this is really, as you know, Michael, this is really, thanks, Kate. This is really emerging. The state of Massachusetts just did a pretty comprehensive energy storage needs assessment. So what we're proposing is that Vermont look at that and really do their own assessment and how that will tie into our energy goals. We're pretty high level at this point, Michael. We're not really deep on details. I would love to, of course, talk with all of our technical experts down here and hear about how we can make sure that that study is comprehensive. So.
Do you want that? Okay. Yeah, I just have one quick comment, and it's not deep in the weeds like Laura's. Luckily, Laura's the weeder on this one because I'm a good gardener, but I really don't like weeds. Mollie mentioned the national climate economy, which is something that Paul Costello, who is a real gift to our state. He's a convener on many issues, and he's done an amazing job convening groups on issues of critical to Vermont's future. And I just wanted to mention that Mollie and I are regulars. Thursday rather, the Climate Solutions Group now, I think we're called. We put a positive spin on our name instead of climate problems or climate challenges or climate solutions. And what I want to say is every week we talk about things we could be doing as a state with regard to global climate change, which, as Barack Obama said, and I believe with all of my heart, is one of the greatest challenges that confronts us right now, right here. And it is so vital to our children and our grandchildren for us to get this right and get going. So we are working on it. Mollie and I also have gone every year to the Climate Economy Summit that Paul convenes in Randolph. And they come up with all sorts of great ideas about how we as a state can lead the way. Because, believe me, Washington ain't gonna do it. There are some climate deniers right there, right at the top of the food chain, let's call it that. Yeah, I'd call it a food chain. That's what I call Donald Trump. Anyway, the long and the short of it is, so I suggested to bring people here to Vermont. Let's set a precedent. Let's have a national climate economy conference in our state. That'll be August. That'll be in Burlington. There's all sorts of really cool stuff. Check it out. Paul will be getting the word out. It'll be really cool. We're going to lead on this, and we're going to attract young people, and we're going to continue to be the #1 job generator in renewable energy. Thank you.
Beverly. Question for Becca. With this flexibility bill for Act 46, does part of the flexibility include Vernon being able to leave the district without approval of the rest of the towns?
Yes.
Yes, and I'm a Dummerston resident.
I understand. Yes, that's part of the bill. Okay, and it is Vernon. It is in a particularly challenging situation, but yes, that is part of it.
Question in the back, yes.
Hi, I'm Amy from the Windham County Humane Society, and I'm going to apologize in advance for raising a very uncomfortable topic, but we have not passed a bill against animal sexual abuse in this state. We're one of 9 states, I believe, that don't have an anti-bestiality bill, and that's because nobody wants to talk about it. So it's finally come up in the legislative session this time. New Hampshire passed their bill last year. If you think it doesn't happen, I'm sorry to tell you that it does happen. We need the bill badly. When you shrink it down to a mere 9 states, predators of that type actually look to us and look to websites that exist to find what they're looking for. And there's very clear data that those that abuse animals are likely abusing their spouses or their children. So it's a very important topic for people to know about. So happy to be the one to raise it here publicly. And hoping maybe some of you know about it and have anything to add to that.
It's in the House, so.
I don't know. I have no idea if any testimony has happened in committee. That would be probably in Carolyn Partridge's committee, and she's not here.
And
I'll ask and see.
And it's all about bandwidth, and I am sure it is on their radar screen, and I am sure it is on their list, and they check out, I think it's today's or maybe yesterday's Brattleboro Reformer. Carolyn has a thing. A lot of it's about animals. My father was a Cornell-educated vet. He started equine and canine, then went to bovine, and well, anyway, small and large practice is the point. But I care about this. I know Carolyn cares desperately about this, as does John Bartholomew,
yes,
her vice chair, who's a vet. So there you go.
John, but I just want to bring, because every time I talk to anybody, they say,
It's
I had no idea.
It's uncomfortable.
And people don't think it's an issue, like, well, we don't need that law. We do need the law.
You bet. Thank you for bringing up an uncomfortable, very difficult, sordid issue that we need to sort out.
That's right.
Is that Annie? Is
Yes.
that? So one thing that I always want to let folks know in situations such as this, when there's an issue that is absolutely compelling to you personally, which is contact the chair and the chair of the committee, but also their committee assistant, and say, I want to testify. And you can testify via phone. You do not need to drive to Montpelier. And we keep wanting to get that word out in Windham County. It's a long way to drive, but you can get on speakerphone, get your other activists and advocates on this issue to contact so that they know they should be taking testimony on it, that people do care about it. Because when it doesn't seem like there's a lot of push for it, then of course the issue that is getting more attention is going to rise to the surface because there's not that much time. But so I would encourage you to do that.
There's a bill floating around, and it may have already fallen by the wayside, but it was introduced, that would create an exemption to the open meetings law for committees of 3 or less. It was introduced by a legislator who had a school board who had the inconvenience of having to take minutes when, you know, a majority of 2 out of 3 met or went on a fact-finding trip or some such thing. And I just hope that this goes nowhere because, you know, we have a good open meetings and open records law. It could be better. There are states that have better laws. And the last thing we want to do is start creating exemptions for it because that's a slippery slope.
Thank you. Open meetings is one of the purviews of the Government Operations Committee, and I think that, that we just got a bill the other day about this. I think it was just introduced, and my feeling is exactly like yours, and as long as I'm chair of the committee, I don't think it'll go too far. Committees can always roll their chairs, but it happens very rarely, and chairs do have a certain amount of power to take up bills or not take them up. And in this case, I've used the example when somebody says, yeah, but we just did, and we're not really an important committee anyway. And so I said, well, so what if you had a tree committee in your town, and they didn't keep any minutes, and they didn't post any agendas, and they didn't post their minutes or anything, and suddenly you come into the village one morning and all the maple trees are gone because the tree committee decided they didn't want those maple trees there. I mean, it's a far-fetched example, but if we don't have the minutes and the agendas of these committees kept, things can happen because even a 3-person committee can make decisions. Yes, Peter.
Could I just ask a question in general? With conversations in Washington about the Accountable Care Act and some recent articles in the news about the potential budget hitting Vermont for about $200 million, there's a lot of conversation going on. Do you have any sense of what the potential impact on Vermont would be if any of that comes to pass?
Well, we've heard $200 million for Medicaid. Other than that, I'm not sure.
So last week, representatives of Bernie Sanders' office, Patrick Leahy's office, and Peter Welch's office came to meet with Senate leadership specifically about this issue. And the takeaway was, obviously, it's not going to be good news. No matter how it comes down the pike, it's not going to be good news for Vermont because we are federal dollar dependent in Vermont. The scope we're not clear on. I want to assure you that we have not just excellent representation in Congress, but their staffers are excellent. And they are watching behind the scenes where they can have an impact. And so I know we got a note from our pro tem this weekend saying, be prepared to do, and I haven't actually told my wife this yet, be prepared for an additional session in October to deal with the impact. So we're not waiting to see what happens, we're being as proactive as we can. I just want to assure you that we have a great team there. It's not going to be good news, but we're going to do everything we can, and we're going to hold the governor to his statement, which is to do everything we can to mitigate the impact on the most vulnerable Vermonters. And that's where we stand.
No.
Oh, go ahead.
I just want to talk about a little bit of the impact on transportation. We did hear just last week, as you know, that there could be cuts to Amtrak, for example. Amtrak, I think, has been really important for the economy of Brattleboro. I know people come from New York, they come to Brattleboro, they can walk to the Latches, they can walk around, go to restaurants. And we are sort of on the verge of getting that train to Montreal, which would be a huge impact. I'm going on a trip sponsored by the Canadian government next week to look at some of those issues around getting the train to Montreal. So that, could be a huge loss if we can't run the Vermonter. The state subsidizes it. Also, the impact on the Tiger grants. We've used the Tiger grants, which are specific grants for rail and aviation to improve our track on the Western Corridor. So those are just a couple of the ways. And then, as I said, more than half of our funding comes from the federal government. We don't know, we're under a 5-year reauthorization, transportation reauthorization, which has been beneficial to Vermont, but that could change. We really don't know. There's so many uncertainties. So I think we just have to react to what's happening when it's happening and be aware.
And education, of course, is not excluded from the challenges here. I think up to 70% of the staff at the Agency of Education is federally funded. We know that special ed is being targeted. Many outside programs like the 21st Century Grant, which runs all of our expanded learning opportunities programs around the state, not all of them, most of them. And so we're watching it very closely. The one good news about education is that we're funded 1 year out, so that we have that little bit of a lag. So we're starting now, after crossover, to start talking about how are we going to mitigate the biggest challenges that we're facing around the cuts to those students who are in most vulnerable situations in the state. So.
Okay, just one quick comment. Liberty Mutual, top executive from Liberty Mutual spoke on VPR this morning. The Commerce Committee also is under our purview, which is quite wide, pretty broad scope. We cover insurance. The Liberty Mutual guy said, what do we count on in insurance? We count on vitality of the market. This market is not going to be viable or vital under the Trump administration. It's going to shrink to the point where, so I think it's going to basically collapse under its own weight, which makes me quite pleased. I know it looks bad now, but I think that asking poor people to pay premiums, they have no money to pay. 20 states are going to have a real problem with old people and poor people on Medicaid, because guess what? The ACA covered them. This guy is not going to cover them. So he's going to ask the poorest of the poor to pay for something that they can ill afford. That's not going to help the insurance market. Talk to some insurers, talk to Commerce. Thank you.
Dr. Joella Ferraro, and I'm speaking in my role right now as director of the Vermont Suicide Prevention Center, which is a public-private partnership between Agency of Human Services, Department of Mental Health, Center for Health and Learning, and about 40 other organizations, agencies. The coalition is representative of many survivors of suicide attempts and suicide loss. And we have a bill, and I would like to publicly thank our House representatives. We had 10 representatives sponsor a bill called Bill H-184, Suicide Tracking and Evaluation. And Representative Stuart was one of the co-sponsors, so we thank you for that. And they took the bill up, and they took testimony, they discussed it, and they passed it, so we're very pleased about that. I'd like to ask my colleagues in the Senate, when it comes to the Senate, which you will this week, to please give it attention. This is a bill that's coming right now without a request for funding. However, it is of utmost importance for us to make any progress on this devastating public health issue that we have more refined systems of surveillance and tracking. And this is a very, very highly interdisciplinary endeavor between multiple departments, agencies, and the bill would look for patterns, trends, so we can assess gaps, resources, learn more about this as a public health issue, and do some better prevention in terms of our healthcare systems strategies. So I would ask you to take note of that this week. I believe it will be presented by Representative Betsy Dunn, and hopefully we will have some testimony there. If you get wind of it and could let me know, that would be great. And I thank you for taking this issue very seriously. Suicide is sadly the second leading cause of death for Vermonters between the ages of 15 and 24, and the third leading cause of death for Vermonters between the ages of 25 and 65. Vermont has a very high suicide rate, 30% above the national average. And so a very, very broad effort with very, very little funding to address this issue, and we are making strides, but need to attack it on a policy level as well.
I believe it'll go to health and welfare.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you. We have to get everybody out of here, so I'm wondering if are you folks to be able to stick around and maybe answer a couple of questions? people have, unfortunately, we all have to go to jobs. We didn't have to. I want to just again thank all the legislators for everything they do, and thank you for coming here today. It's extremely informative, and I know we have a couple more months left of the legislative session. So there's on each of your tables, there's how to contact all the Windham County legislators. So if you have any questions or concerns, I'm sure they will be responsive. And thank you all for coming. And we have a lot of other events coming up this year, which we think are exciting. We'll be telling you about. But don't forget, April 26th, you can eat food, mix and mingle, and not have to listen to people speak. So that's the added benefit. So thank you.